The marble floor reflected everything: crystal chandeliers, Italian leather shoes, the nervous sweat on a young man's forehead as he tried to balance three suitcases that cost more than his annual salary. The Beverly Hills Hotel, pink palace of power and privilege, where movie deals were made over champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week, where the staff moved like ghosts, visible only when needed, invisible when their presence might disturb the fantasy that wealth was effortless. Charles Bronson stood at the elevator bank, wearing a simple dark suit that fit like armor. No jewelry, no flash, just quiet presence that made the ornate lobby feel smaller. He was here for business. Studio meeting about a new film, another Western, another chance to play the man he'd always been, just with better lighting. The bellboy's name was Miguel Santos, 22 years old. Second generation American. Parents came from El Salvador with nothing but work ethic and hope. Miguel spoke three languages, studied accounting at night school, sent half his paycheck home to help his younger sister finish high school. He'd been working at the Beverly Hills Hotel for 8 months, long enough to understand the unspoken rules: smile but don't speak unless spoken to, move efficiently but never hurry, anticipate needs before they're expressed, remember that you're furniture with feelings and the feelings don't matter. The guest's name was Richard Kensington III, old money. East Coast family that made their fortune in railroads and steel when America was building itself. Trust fund baby who'd never worked a day in his life but inherited the arrogance of men who had 45 years old, soft around the middle with the kind of tan that comes from golf courses instead of labor. Kensington had arrived in a Rolls Royce with enough luggage for a month-long safari: designer suits and garment bags, leather cases for his watches, a humidor for cigars that cost more than Miguel's rent. Everything about him announced wealth and privilege, and the assumption that money made him superior to people who worked for it. Miguel had been assigned to transport Kensington's luggage to the penthouse suite: 7 bags, 3 hanging wardrobes, a case of vintage whiskey, all of it requiring careful handling and multiple trips because the elevator was small and the penthouse was 20 floors up. Kensington followed Miguel to the elevator, talking loudly on a gold-plated phone about stock portfolios and tax shelters and people who disappointed him. His voice carried across the lobby, designed to impress strangers with his importance, his connections, his complete indifference to privacy or discretion. The elevator doors opened. Miguel began loading luggage, arranging it carefully to maximize space and minimize damage. Professional movements refined by 8 months of practice, respectful handling of other people's possessions, even when those possessions cost more than his family's car. Kensington ended his phone call, stepped into the elevator like he was boarding his private jet, looked around at Miguel and the luggage with the expression of someone inspecting disappointing merchandise. "Careful with that case," Kensington said, pointing to a leather briefcase. "It costs more than you make in 6 months." Miguel nodded politely. "Yes, sir, I'll be very careful." Kensington studied Miguel like he was examining a specimen, taking in the pressed uniform, the polite demeanor, the careful way he handled expensive things that would never belong to him. "Where are you from?" Kensington asked, not curious, evaluating. "Los Angeles, sir, born here." "No, where are you really from? Your people?" Miguel's hands paused for just a moment on the briefcase. He'd heard this question before, the one that meant you don't look like you belong here, the one that assumed being brown meant being foreign, being temporary, being less. "My parents are from El Salvador, sir." Kensington nodded like this confirmed something. "I thought so. You all have that look, that eager to please thing, grateful for whatever scraps you get." The elevator was rising, floor numbers lighting up like a countdown. Miguel kept his face neutral, professional. 8 months of experience had taught him that responding to insults was a luxury he couldn't afford: bills to pay, family to support, future to protect. How much school did you finish? Kensington continued. High school? Or did you drop out to start carrying bags? I graduated high school, sir. I'm studying accounting at night. Kensington laughed. Accounting. That's ambitious. Think you'll actually finish, or will you end up like most of your people, doing manual labor until you're too old to be useful? The words hit like physical blows. Miguel's jaw tightened, his hands clenched around the briefcase handle. 8 months of swallowing pride. 8 months of accepting disrespect as part of the job. 8 months of telling himself it was temporary, that education would lift him out of this, that dignity was something he could afford later. I plan to finish, sir. Plans are nice, Kensington said, but let's be realistic. This is probably as good as it gets for someone like you carrying bags for people who actually matter. You should be grateful in your parents' country you'd be lucky to have any job at all. The elevator reached the 20th floor, doors opened with a soft chime. Miguel began unloading luggage, moving it into the hallway with mechanical precision, hands steady despite the anger burning in his chest, voice calm despite the humiliation crawling up his throat. That's when Charles Bronson stepped out of his room. He'd been staying 3 doors down from the penthouse, heard voices in the hallway, came out to investigate the way he'd learned to investigate when something felt wrong, the way a man learns to move when he's spent years understanding that trouble often starts with words before it escalates to violence. Bronson took in the scene instantly. Young man in hotel uniform arranging expensive luggage, well-dressed guest standing over him like a supervisor examining inadequate work. The body language told the story. Authority and submission, power and powerlessness, rich man and working boy. Kensington noticed Bronson, immediately recognized him from movies and magazine covers. Charles Bronson, box office star, Hollywood royalty. Exactly the kind of person worth impressing. Mr. Bronson. Kensington extended his hand enthusiastically. Richard Kensington, huge fan, loved you in Death Wish. Finally, a movie that understands what this country needs. Bronson shook the offered hand briefly, politely. His attention focused on Miguel, who was carefully arranging suitcases against the wall with the precision of someone who understood that mistakes had consequences. Having some trouble with the help, Kensington continued, gesturing toward Miguel like he was discussing a malfunctioning appliance. These people try hard, but they don't really understand quality, different standards, you know? Bronson's brown eyes shifted to Kensington's face, studied it the way he might study a map of unfamiliar territory, reading the terrain, understanding the landmarks, recognizing the type of man who confused wealth with worth. What kind of different standards? Bronson asked quietly. Kensington laughed, assuming Bronson shared his perspective, assuming successful men automatically understood each other across class lines, assuming prejudice was just practical realism dressed in expensive clothes. Work ethic, attention to detail, basic competence. I was just explaining to this boy how lucky he is to have a job like this in his country. He'd be picking fruit or something. Miguel's back straightened, not confrontational, just proud. The way a man stands when he's been insulted but won't give his tormentor the satisfaction of a visible reaction, professional dignity in the face of personal attack. Bronson looked at Miguel, then back at Kensington. Something shifted in his expression, not anger, something colder, more controlled. The look of a man who'd made a decision and was calculating the most effective way to implement it. What's your name, son? Bronson asked Miguel. Miguel Santos, sir. You studying something, Miguel? Accounting, sir. Night school at UCLA. Bronson nodded. That's good work. Important work. Takes discipline. Kensington's smile flickered. This wasn't going according to script. Bronson was supposed to agree with him, supposed to share his casual contempt for service workers, supposed to understand that successful people needed to stick together against the lesser classes. Well, yes, Kensington said carefully, education is important, but let's be realistic about expectations. What expectations? Kensington looked around the hallway, expensive carpet, gilt-framed mirrors, crystal sconces that cost more than most cars, the physical representation of a world he'd been born into and assumed he deserved. This boy is carrying bags at a hotel, Kensington said. His people come here with nothing, no skills, no education, no understanding of how things work. They should be grateful for whatever opportunities they get, not reaching for things beyond their capacity. The words hung in the air like smoke, ugly, poisonous, the kind of casual racism that hid behind practical concerns and realistic expectations, the kind that reduced human beings to their utility, their service, their willingness to accept less than dignity. Miguel's hands were steady on the luggage, but something in his eyes had changed. 8 months of accepting disrespect, 8 months of swallowing pride, 8 months of telling himself it was temporary. But having it said in front of Charles Bronson, having his dreams dismissed as unrealistic by a man who'd never worked for anything, cut deeper than usual. Bronson stepped closer to Kensington, not threatening, just present, close enough that Kensington could smell his cologne, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to understand that something important was happening. Mr. Kensington, Bronson said quietly, let me tell you about capacity. His voice was calm, conversational, the tone you might use to discuss weather or sports scores, but something underneath carried weight, authority, the kind of certainty that comes from absolute confidence in your own position. I grew up in Pennsylvania, coal mining family, 15 kids. Father died when I was 10, worked in the mines myself starting at 14, carried 100-pound sacks of grain, dug ditches, laid brick, spent 10 years building things with my hands before anyone gave me a chance to act. Kensington's smile had completely disappeared. He was listening now, really listening, not to a movie star sharing colorful background stories, but to a working man explaining the difference between earned success and inherited privilege. You know what I learned carrying those grain sacks? Bronson continued. I learned that a man's worth isn't measured by what he inherits. It's measured by what he builds, what he earns, how he treats people who can't help him get ahead. Bronson turned to Miguel, you working to support family? Yes, sir. My parents, my sister's still in high school. How many hours you work here? 40 hours a week, sir. Plus classes 4 nights. What's your GPA? Miguel hesitated, glanced at Kensington, back at Bronson. 3.7, comma, sir. Bronson nodded. That's good work, honest work. He looked back at Kensington. This young man is working 60 hours a week, supporting 3 people, maintaining a 3.7 GPA in accounting, building something with his life through discipline and sacrifice. Pause. Let that sink in. What are you building, Mr. Kensington? The question hung in the air like a blade, simple, direct, impossible to answer without revealing the emptiness underneath the expensive clothes and inherited money. Kensington opened his mouth, closed it, looked around for support that wasn't coming. I manage investments, family interests, manage what other people built. Well, yes, but Miguel here is building something new. You're maintaining something old. Which one of you has more capacity? Kensington's face had gone from pink to red to white, 8 seconds from comfortable superiority to uncomfortable self-examination. 8 seconds to have his entire worldview challenged by a movie star who understood working for a living. Bronson pulled out his wallet, not a display of wealth, just practical action, removed a business card, handed it to Miguel. You graduate with that GPA, you call this number. Friend of mine runs an accounting firm in Century City. Good firm, fair people, they appreciate hard work. Miguel took the card with hands that were no longer quite steady, not from fear, from possibility, from the sudden understanding that dignity had just been restored by someone who didn't owe him anything. Thank you, sir. I thank you. Bronson turned back to Kensington. Mr. Kensington, you should know that this hotel employs some of the hardest working people in Los Angeles. People who take pride in their service, people who deserve respect. His voice dropped lower, not threatening, just final. If you can't show that respect, maybe you should find accommodations more suited to your expectations. Kensington stood there for a moment, expensive suit, gold watch, manicured hands, all the external markers of success, but looking smaller somehow, diminished, like air had leaked out of his sense of superiority. I didn't mean, I was just making conversation. Now you can make different conversation. Kensington nodded quickly. Of course, absolutely. Miguel, thank you for the excellent service. Very professional. Miguel straightened. Thank you, sir. Kensington grabbed his briefcase, disappeared into his suite. Door closed with expensive silence. Hallway returned to normal, except nothing was normal anymore. 8 seconds had rewritten the power dynamic. 8 seconds had shown Miguel that respect was possible. 8 seconds had taught Kensington that money doesn't buy the right to treat people like objects. Bronson and Miguel were alone in the hallway, crystal sconces casting warm light on marble walls, the kind of luxury that usually emphasized class differences, but feeling different now, feeling like neutral ground. Mr. Bronson, Miguel said quietly, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Bronson considered the question because 20 years ago I was carrying bags too, different kind of bags, coal sacks instead of suitcases. But I remember what it feels like to be treated like you don't matter. Miguel looked at the business card. Is this real? The accounting firm. Real as anything. You earn that degree, they'll give you a fair shot. Rest is up to you. I won't let you down. Bronson smiled. You're not working for me, son. You're working for yourself, for your family, for the future you're building. Don't let anyone tell you that's unrealistic. 3 years later, Miguel Santos graduated from UCLA with a 3.8 GPA in accounting, called the number on Bronson's card, got an interview, got hired, started as a junior accountant at Friedman, Keller and Associates in Century City. 6 years after that, Miguel became a partner, specialized in small business accounting, helped immigrant families navigate tax law and build legitimate enterprises, employed 15 people, all of them treated with dignity, all of them paid fairly. 10 years after the hotel encounter, Miguel owned his own firm, Santos and Associates, 47 employees, $1 million annual revenue. But more important than the money, he'd built something, created opportunity for others. Prove that capacity isn't determined by background. Miguel never forgot the lesson Charles Bronson taught him, not about accounting or business success, about dignity, about treating people as human beings regardless of their position in life, about understanding that everyone is building something and that something deserves respect. Richard Kensington III continued living off his trust fund, never built anything new, never created opportunity for others, never learned the difference between inherited wealth and earned success. Died 20 years later, having contributed nothing except tax-deductible donations to maintain his social standing. The business card Bronson gave Miguel became framed and hung in Miguel's office, not as a trophy, as a reminder That dignity is something you give to others, not something you hoard for yourself. That 8 seconds of standing up for what's right can change a life trajectory. Charles Bronson never spoke publicly about that encounter, never used it for publicity or social credit, just another moment where he chose to use his authority to protect someone who needed protection. 8 seconds to teach two lessons. That respect isn't earned by wealth, it's earned by character. And that real success is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you help others build. 8 seconds to prove that the strongest thing you can do is stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. 8 seconds that rippled forward through decades, through Miguel's career and the families he helped and the employees he treated with dignity, through the understanding that everyone deserves a chance to prove their capacity. That's what real power looks like. Not the ability to diminish others, but the wisdom to lift them up. 8 seconds in a hotel hallway, 8 seconds that changed everything.